Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point is considered by many to be the best roller coaster in the world. This Rocky Mountain Construction hybrid conversion of Mean Streak feels like an enthusiast pipe dream. This record-breaking coaster opened as the world's tallest and fastest hybrid coaster, and it features the most airtime of any roller coaster. This ride will have you out of your seat for nearly 30 seconds. Does all this make Steel Vengeance a perfect ride and my favorite roller coaster? Find out in this review. Mean Streak opened in 1991 as the world's tallest wooden roller coaster, standing 161 feet or 49 meters tall. Built by the Din Corporation, Mean Streak was well received in its early years, but this monstrous wooden roller coaster quickly became rough. Cedar Point added trims in 1994 to slow the coaster down in an attempt to make it more comfortable, but was still disliked by a majority of guests. Cedar Point also retracted large chunks of the ride, but this wasn't super effective. Even on the busiest of days, Mean Streak was usually a walk-on. In 2011, Rocky Mountain Construction debuted their steel iBox track on New Texas Giant at Six Flags Over Texas. Six Flags and RMC converted Texas Giant into a smooth, airtime machine. Texas Giant was an aging wooden roller coaster, also built by the Din Corporation, with a very similar layout to Mean Streak, so enthusiasts clamored for Cedar Fair to give the same treatment to Mean Streak. Six Flags converted 6 rough wood coasters into steel coasters between 2011 and 2016. Then in 2016, Cedar Point announced that Mean Streak would permanently close in September that year. Enthusiasts knew what was coming next. Over the next year, RMC started adding their signature iBox track to Mean Streak, but Cedar Point wouldn't announce the new coaster until late in 2017. Steel Vengeance would open in 2018 as the world's tallest and fastest hybrid roller coaster. It would be the world's first hyper-hybrid coaster, standing 205 feet or 62 meters tall and reaching speeds of 74 miles per hour or 119 kilometers per hour. Designed by Alan Schilke, the coaster would feature 5,740 feet or 1,750 meters of track and 4 inversions. But most notably, the coaster would have the most airtime of any ride in the world. RMC went all out with this layout and squeezed airtime hills in wherever possible. Steel Vengeance is located in the very back of Cedar Point in Frontier Town. It's roughly 1 mile from the main entrance, and the ride received a creative backstory tying it to its next-door neighbor in Maverick. Steel Vengeance tells the story of 3 outlaws, Blackjack, Digger, and Chess, who want revenge on Maverick. This massive roller coaster is their form of revenge. Steel Vengeance opened on May 5, 2018, but the ride got off to a rocky start. 2 trains lightly bumped in the station on opening day, which forced the park to run their new coaster with just 1 train for the next month. Steel Vengeance would resume 2 train operations in June, and has regularly operated with 3 trains from September 2018 onwards. Ever since the coaster opened, it has been notorious for having one of the longest lines of any amusement ride in the world. Steel Vengeance regularly has 1.5 to 2 hour waits most days. Even the fast lane queue line can take 30 to 45 minutes some days. If you don't have fast lane, there are 3 ways to ride Steel Vengeance with a shorter wait. 1. Rope drop the attraction. The ride isn't always part of early entry, but when it does, there's a morning stampede to Steel Vengeance. You're gonna have to run to get there. 2. Ride it on a rainy day. Cedar Point may not have the best rain policy as a whole, but Steel Vengeance is one of the coasters that can operate in the rain. The park is much less crowded on days like this, but know it could impact your ability to ride some of the park's other attractions. 3. Ride it right before closing. Cedar Point keeps the queue line open right up until the closing hour. Lines usually decrease towards closing time, and even if they don't, at least you're not wasting the park's opening hours while waiting in line. Plus, Steel Vengeance is a cool night ride anyway. Steel Vengeance is a wildly popular ride, and unfortunately, it doesn't have the same capacity as Cedar Point's other headlining attractions. Each train has 6 cars. Each car seats 4 riders in rows of 2. So each train can seat a maximum of 24 riders. But the biggest issue is how long it takes to load the trains. Steel Vengeance frequently stacks 1 to 2 trains in the final brake run. The crew moves fast, but guests take a while to unload due to the super heavy restraints, and the restraint check process occurs in 2 phases. The employees first need to check the seatbelts, and then they need to lower the restraints. If guests erroneously lower the lap bar before they're instructed to, and usually someone will, they need to unlock and restart the process. Cedar Point has banned bags and other loose articles from Steel Vengeance's station from day one. This is a similar policy they've had in a few of their other major coasters over the years. But after a rider was struck in the face by a cell phone in the ride's opening year, Cedar Point banned any metal object from entering the coaster's queue line. The park added metal detectors to enforce this. This essentially turned Steel Vengeance into an upcharge attraction, as riders would have to pay $1 to $2 for a locker to store their keys, wallet, and phone. Waiting in Steel Vengeance's lengthy queue line without a phone was painful. Although, funny story about that. The first time I rode Steel Vengeance in 2018, I brought a Fantasy Football Sports Illustrated magazine with me. I knew I'd have to crumple it up to fit it in my pocket when it was my turn to ride, and even though it caused my pocket to swell to an unnatural size, far more than if I had my cell phone in my pocket, the operators had no issue with it because it wasn't made of metal. Cedar Point knew this policy was unpopular, so they added zippered pouches to the coaster in 2019. This would allow guests to safely store their metal objects while they rode. While this was more popular than the lockers, it really slowed down dispatches. Guests couldn't reach the pouches while the restraints were locked, so this increased the time needed for guests to unload. Once the COVID-19 pandemic hit, Cedar Point switched back to the old locker policy for 2020. In 2021, they found an effective and hopefully final solution. Cedar Point added free lockers right before the station. This had the benefit of saving guests money and also allowing guests to keep their phone for a majority of the wait. Once you reach the station, the operators will assign you a seat. However, they will usually take seating requests. There isn't a bad seat on Steel Vengeance, every seat is amazing. But I do think the back is a little bit better than the other rows, so I typically ask to sit there. If you've ridden any other RMC, you're likely familiar with the trains. The seats box you in on all sides. Then you have a lap bar with shin guards. The restraints are snug, particularly if you're on the taller side, but I have no trouble with them. The restraints aren't uncomfortable, and they allow you to fully feel this coaster's forces. Once dispatched, you turn to the right and bounce over 2 bunny hills. While you won't get any airtime on these hills, they do sort of lurch you forwards. You then ascend the massive chain lift, and this lift hill is obnoxiously loud, much more so than the RMCs that came before it, but the views are exceptional. You have a full view of Cedar Point to your right, and you also get a sweet view of Lake Erie. Once at the top, you are thrown over the 200-foot or 61-meter tall drop. This is a gigantic vertical drop, and it's loaded with airtime. Those in the back car get sustained ejector airtime. The airtime has the same power as the smaller RMC drops, it's just sustained longer on Steel Vengeance. Even if you're up front, you'll still get some floater airtime because of this drop's sheer height and steepness. This is a very underrated element on Steel Vengeance. You then careen over a small speed hill. This hill abruptly throws you forwards. You more or less get a diagonal pop of ejector airtime. Steel Vengeance then flies over the 2 best hills in the ride. First comes the Top Hat. This massive camelback delivers several seconds of very strong and sustained ejector airtime. It's some of the best sustained airtime on any coaster. And since the Top Hat gradually turns right and has minimal banking, you also get some laterals on the ascent and descent. Second comes the insane outward bank turn. The airtime is just as powerful and sustained as the prior Top Hat, except the outward bank ejects you at an angle. Getting airtime this intense while the horizon is rotated 45 degrees is a surreal visual. You then fly over a step up over the main entrance. This is one of the few hills in the ride that doesn't give ejector airtime. Rather, it gives decent floater in every row. Then comes the first inversion, an awesome 0G roll. The element starts with some forceful hang time, but the transition out of the element is particularly special. The The roll dips downwards, so the hang time seamlessly transitions into airtime. This is a similar sensation to the exit of Iron Rattler's zero-G roll. You then traverse a wave turn high above the ground that gives a weak pop of airtime. And then you zip down the ride's second inversion, a very unique zero-G stall. Most stalls occur at the apex of the element. They're shaped parabolically. Steel Vengeance's stall is angled downwards. It feels like a mix of one of their barrel roll drops and a stall. You are wildly whipped through the element, getting good hang time with some very abrupt laterals. It is the best inversion on the ride. The stall doesn't bring you all the way down to the ground, so there's the sneaky dip after the inversion. The sudden drop gives good ejector airtime in the back, and good floater airtime towards the front. You then navigate this crazy double up into the mid-course brake run. The first hump has a super sharp crest, so you get the ride's most powerful airtime moment. And it doesn't matter where you're sitting. The ejector airtime is borderline violent. You then twist to the left, getting some laterals from the sharp turn, and then you hop into the mid-course brake run. The second descent also gives a solid burst of airtime in all rows. The brake run is your only chance to catch your breath. I find the mid-course trim has a negligible impact on the ride, even if it hits. The only element it seems to impact for me is the drop off the mid-course. If you're trimmed, you get floater airtime on this drop. If you're untrimmed, you get a weak pop of airtime up front and nice ejector airtime in the back. You then navigate another double up. This one is more stretched out. The first hop delivers good floater airtime towards the front and a weaker pop towards the back. The second hop delivers an ejector pop for those up front, and the resultant drop delivers solid floater airtime. Steel Vengeance then treats riders to an off-axis camelback. The apex throws you outwards, and then you bank inwards on the descent. The element delivers weak sustained ejector throughout the train, and you also have some awesome head choppers with the coaster support structure, and that will be a theme in the second half. You then shoot around this overbank. It's one of the few elements on the ride that offers no airtime. Instead, it's just snappy and disorienting because you're in a sea of supports. You then haul through a fast and furious zero-G roll, getting a delightful combination of forceful hang time and some laterals. It's one of RMC's wildest zero-G rolls because of the speed at which you take it. Steel Vengeance then charges over back-to-back bunny hills. Both give great ejector airtime regardless of where you're sitting. The second dives back into the ride support structure, and then you navigate this weirdly profiled element. It feels like a wave turn that sharply banks 90 degrees, and in typical RMC fashion, you will get popped out of your seat. You then spin through a nice zero-G roll. This one isn't as snappy as the prior one, but the slower speed allows for a little bit of extra hang time, and the supports make it quite dizzying. The zero-G roll rotates clockwise, yet the subsequent turn goes left, so you get an abrupt kick of laterals because your body isn't expecting to go in that direction. You then creep over this banked hill that gives an itty-bitty pop of airtime, and then you experience Steel Vengeance's wild finale. You receive 6 consecutive ejector airtime pops in rapid-fire succession. Your butt barely has time to return to the seat in between airtime pops. You are bounced out of your seat like a rag doll. I love the tenacity of this finale, but I know some people find it too much, particularly if you find the restraints uncomfortable because you have no time to recover in between the bunny hills. You then hit the brake run, and most riders will be amped up from such an extreme ride. I know I am. And as awesome as the near misses are by day, they're extra special at night. The way the supports are lit is dizzying, and it really amplifies this coaster's sense of speed. Just watch out for the bugs if you're sitting up front. You'll be a human shield for the rest of the train. Steel Vengeance is an immaculately smooth coaster. It's remarkable how the train effortlessly navigates such a twisted and aggressive layout. The ride is super long with nearly 82 seconds of prime ride time. Few coasters are longer, and even more impressively, Steel Vengeance is always doing something. The coaster has near flawless pacing. Really, the only break in the action is the mid-course brake run. You spend the rest of the time getting launched out of your seat. So what would I rate Steel Vengeance? I'm giving this RMC hybrid conversion a perfect 10 out of 10. Steel Vengeance is spectacular. The ride feels like two distinct coasters blended into one. The first half has a series of supersized elements with more sustained airtime, particularly on the top hat and outward banked hill. Those are two of the best hills in any coaster. Then the second half is smaller, more compact elements that still aggressively throw you from your seat. And then each half has two inversions as well for good measure. I'd argue each half of Steel Vengeance will be a borderline top 10 to 15 steel coaster on its own. So when you put this extremely long ride together, you have something that's truly special. Steel Vengeance is the best coaster in the world for airtime, and it also adds in some laterals and hang time for variety. The lone weakness with Steel Vengeance, in my opinion, is that it just doesn't do much in the positive G department. But that doesn't bother me because the coaster is so proficient at throwing me from my seat. It doesn't need positive Gs. After riding Steel Vengeance, it immediately became my favorite steel coaster in 2018. The amount of high quality ride time blew me away. The only coaster I preferred to Steel Vengeance was Lightning Rod, and since the latter was converted to a steel coaster in 2021, it did overtake Steel Vengeance in that category. But that doesn't make Steel Vengeance any less impressive. There's a reason many enthusiasts deem this as the world's best coaster. So those are my thoughts on Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point. What are your thoughts on this massive RMC creation? Do you think it's the world's best coaster? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you enjoyed this review, I'd appreciate it if you gave this video a like, and you considered subscribing, because there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.